This podcast provides information to help esports professionals identify and approach legal problems. This podcast is intended for informational purposes only. Legal information is not the same as legal advice, which is an application of law to a party's specific set of circumstances.
You should not and are not authorized to use this podcast as a source of legal advice. And the information in this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship between the Law of Esports podcast, any of the lawyers or affiliates of the podcast, and any consumer of this podcast.
Welcome to the Law of Esports podcast, the #1 podcast that discusses legal issues as they relate to the world of esports. My name is Jake Hicks, and I'm an attorney that represents teams, leagues, and organizations.
And my name is Nefi Lopez, and I'm an attorney that represents players, streamers, and personalities.
And today we have another installment of our Pro Op series where we bring you guests from across the spectrum of esports jobs and across this beautiful industry that we know and love in esports. And we couldn't be more excited today to bring to you one of the foremost journalists in the esports industry. And I know we've had a few journalists on this show before and on this podcast that we know and love and are very near and dear to our hearts. But the man we have today, the 2021 Esports Award, Journalist of the Year, very recent, but also if you were to make a Mount Rushmore of esports journalists, this guy would certainly be on it. And if you talk about some of the biggest breaking stories in the past 3, 4, 5 years in esports, you've probably seen this man's name before, and that is Mr. Kevin Hitt. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, totally glad to be here. Look forward to an engaging conversation about various topics in the space.
Awesome, man. Well,
Absolutely,
thank you so
man.
much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And we know that you have a rich history within esports, but you also have a fascinating history, as we understand it, of how you got into esports, as so many of us do in this industry, right? Very few people started in esports when they were in grade school and came up all the way through the industry. But we just start off by telling us kind of where you grew up and how you sort of came up in the world before all the esports stuff came in.
Yeah, I like to describe myself. And this is going to, again, tell everybody exactly how old I am, I guess. But there's a movie out there. It's called Big Fish, okay? Now, it's a little sad, but this is why it's important. Big Fish is about a dad that is on his deathbed that's been telling stories to his kids over the years about all the things that he has done over the course of his life. Well, they kind of just, push him to the side, appease him, and just go, okay, Dad. But when he passes away, everybody from the stories he told shows up to his funeral. So all of his kids go, wait, are you kidding? That was true. I really do liken myself to that story in the esports space because I honestly don't think there's anybody that's been in law enforcement, as a law enforcement officer as I have. I've worked for city government running leagues with 300 teams in them for youth sports. I've been a collegiate volleyball coach, winning a national championship at Northern Michigan University. And as we were discussing earlier, a Division I volleyball coach, an Olympic volleyball coach for the London Games, the 2012 quad. And then, wherever that took me, to journalism. And so I've basically, run the gambit of so many different things that I just can't settle down. So, after I got injured in law enforcement, I just had to get out because if you get hurt and you have a lingering injury, it's, officer safety, things like that. You're not going to be able to continue. I sort of was taking stock of my skill set. I could always coach, right? But I was like, well, I write reports and I write every day and they're pretty factual. And so I thought, well, let's try it. So I applied to different places. And back then in 2005, 6, and then again in 2013-ish, people were looking for cheap labor, basically, to pay you nothing to write a whole lot, right? I mean, that's sort of what has happened in the space. And so I applied at a couple places and ended up working for RotoWire, where I was the National League depth charts writer for pitching. So I could tell you who was a starter, who's a closer on all the teams in the National League for about a couple of years. And then lo and behold, Jeff Erickson and the rest of the crew, they got together and they're like, "Hey, Kev, you play video games?" And I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "Okay, you're part of the esports division now."
There we go.
And literally like that, we were doing Dota 2 notes and Counter-Strike notes for ESPN. Because they had a contract with us where they're literally doing player notes like they would do Major League or fantasy football, right? Where you click on the player box and it says, Akers was twisted his ankle in game, what yada, yada, yada. And you would write. So I'd write those notes for CSGO and Dota. But what we found was that I sucked and that I was boring and that I wrote them very factually like a report. Right. And people did not want to read that. So I had a couple friends go, "Kevin, you're really good at being factual and chronological, but dude, you're boring as hell and you need to add some flavor to it." So over the years, I honed that and ended up going, from RotoWire to Shannon Terry's WWG, who is now comicbook.com. I mean, this is a dude that, Jake, you might know. He started Rivals, the football recruiting site, right? And sold that off to Yahoo for like 90 million, and then sold 24/7 Sports off to CBS, I think, for like 40. He was my mentor, and he was the one that flew me to Tennessee and said, "You've got some skills, kid, but we need to work on your presentation." And so he flew me to the office, made sure that, he taught me all the things that he knew, about running websites and about what stories resonate with readers. And then from there, it was just, a litany of different websites until I ended up here at Sports Business Journal.
Wow, man.
Well, and that's a long, long road. Yeah. But before, so I think a lot of people know your name, especially Nefi and I. We really got to know more about your work at the Esports Observer, and certainly with, Hector Rodriguez getting Optic back from Immortals Gaming Club, and that what a massive story that was in the sports business world, not just esports, but how massive that story became. But before this, you mentioned briefly that you grew up and became a law enforcement officer, and before that, were you in sports growing up? Was that something that you were passionate about?
Yeah, I scholarshiped at Northern Michigan and played volleyball there. So, which is funny because if you look at me, I'm 5'9" with new shoes on, and 5'10" in the media guide, though. You guys know how we do. So I played volleyball for the men's team at Northern Michigan, and so I was the number 2 hitter in the conference, captain of the team, because the number 1 hitter in the conference was 6'8" Brent Doble, who happened to be Karch Karai's freaking gold medal winning partner in Atlanta on the sand. And he went to Michigan Tech. And the conference, surprisingly, up there, MIVA, it's like Midwest Intercollegiate, whatever. It was just stacked, and there was a lot of California guys. But baseball was my first love. And I don't know. I mean, what a dummy, right? A 5'9" guy going to take a college scholarship in volleyball and not in baseball, where I might have been able to have a chance afterwards, because there's no 5'9" outside hitters professionally, guys. I'm just going to say it, but there are 5'9" second basemen. So, turned down 3 scholarships in baseball to take 1 for volleyball, and then played on the men's team there.
Nice, man. Nice.
Yeah,
very nice.
And so
what made you go from?
Yeah. Go
ahead, Nefi.
Oh no, sorry, Jay. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, so when you go from college sports, what made you go from there, instead of going into journalism or into further into professional sports, from there to law enforcement?
I've always had a notion of getting bad guys off the streets. I can tell you my first time around, I was an SSO with Orange County Sheriff Department, where I worked in the jails per usual, right? Left there, and then went back into coaching. And the whole time I was still coaching club volleyball, which is like, travel ball, high school kids that try out, yada, yada. So I never left coaching, but I went into law enforcement because I want to help people get bad guys off the street and help everyone, regardless of what you look like, your orientation. And in fact, later on, when I was deciding between LAPD and LA County Sheriff Department, I said in my oral board interview, I said, I'm tired of you guys talking with guns and hats and bats. I'd rather use my words and create a community policing profile. I thought I was going to get kicked out of the room. I thought they literally were going to say, okay, Mr. Hitt, thank you. But I literally got a call before everybody else. And they said, no, you're the guy we want. And that's me in a nutshell. I just want to see people be treated well. The bad guys be removed from any area. And as you guys have probably seen, that's how I carry myself in the esports journalism world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And the question I was going to ask earlier was, so we know that you spent some time in Houston, right? I think you coached at Jake's alma mater at Rice University.
Did.
And
Rice Owls, baby.
If I remember correctly, you said you spent about 3 years. And so it looks like you bounced around quite a bit, with your career and, coaching different schools. Did you spend a lot of time in Texas and Michigan? At what point during that career did you decide, hey, you know what? I'm trying to do it in a way, because I already know the answer to this question, but my understanding is at some point during your journalism career, you started talking about sports, right? And you started working on, you said the pitchers for all the major league teams. When did that convert into video games?
Well, I can legitimately tell you that I had an Atari 2600, to which I had the Atari 5200, went from the Commodore 64 to the Commodore 128 to the Amiga 500 to the Amiga 1500 to a 383 to a 300 baud modem on BBS boards throughout the day.
Yeah.
I was playing Blue Meanies from outer space on the VIC-20. I want to say in like 1985, I was playing this video game, Blue Meanies, which was a Space Invaders knockoff. Yeah. I've played video games my whole life. Like I can tell you, I wasn't good at them. I didn't compete. I played in clans and guilds, and we played, whatever. But I've been playing video games my whole life, and when I saw that esports was a new horizon, right? I mean, some people have been playing competitively forever, but I think we can all agree that sometime in between the years of 2013 and 2015 is when the sort of gold rush of esports took place, and everybody started to get in. It expanded. Organizations are playing in tournaments, are getting big money. Players are dictating, $10,000 a month to play Counter-Strike. I found it fascinating. But what I also found fascinating was the lack of oversight. I think we can talk about the illegal gambling websites that were being ran by a couple of these esports organizations because they couldn't make real money, right? So they had their organization up front, but behind, some of them were match fixing, some of them were running skin sites, Phantom Lord T. Martin, basically giving you a false sense of winning percentage so that 15-year-olds would max out their parents' credit cards. And while there were a couple of people, such as Richard Lewis and some others, there was not a whole lot of people going to bat for people being wronged for fear of being ostracized and kicked out of the space. I can tell you, I'm a survivor. My ability to work in 4 different, sectors allows me to be who I want to be. Because if I go against somebody big in esports that's doing bad things and they want to cancel me or get rid of me, I'll still fight the good fight until they tell me to leave. And if ultimately a bigger entity is successful in telling me to leave, I'll still fight the good fight, but I can go back into law enforcement, as a reserve working cyber crimes and fraud. I've talked to a couple of my friends that have been promoted to captain about literally going back working in cyber crimes and fraud, because as you guys did, they noticed my investigative journalism. My buddy calls me out of nowhere, who's been promoted, and says, Kevin, we can sponsor you back in to work in cybercrimes and fraud because we've seen the work that you've done. So yeah, I've been playing video games. I was that kid and I played video games my whole life, played sports, but at lunch in high school, I was playing D&D with the nerds. So while my cool friends were walking by with their bats and, gloves and going to practice, I was finishing rolling the dice and then running out to practice.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of crazy. So let's unpack that a little bit, because you said a lot of very interesting things, and some of the things that we like to discuss here on this podcast. And some of those things are, for example, the people being wronged and sort of the nastier side of esports. And it's something, and you may or may not know this. We had Richard Lewis on the podcast not too long ago. We released actually one of our more popular episodes, because a lot of these things people are afraid to talk about. And you said it yourself. You have something to fall back on, and so you act in a genuine way to where you feel you're doing what you think is best for the scene and for the people that, like you said, are being wronged. And that's an interesting way to go about. And it sounds like it's sort of a common denominator that we see with some of the greatest investigative journalists in esports, because Richard lives the same way. He's he the way that he writes and the stories that he discusses and sort of his takes are not the mainstream takes, and they're honest, and they're pessimistic to a degree, but it's healthy pessimism, in my opinion. And so at what point during your involvement with esports, because obviously if to somebody new in the scene, they're like, oh, video games, and they look at it kind of in a jolly manner. Did you realize that, oh man, this is turning into a business to where those things are happening to where people are getting wronged?
Follow the money. Whenever you find sectors in the business space where there's a lot of money being poured into, all the charlatans and snake oil salesmen are going to meet you there. Just like at any festival, just like at any concert, all the pickpockets, all the thieves, everybody that they see it, as a sea of victims, right? There are people like that. And some of us, and it's okay. I God love the naive folk that just want to, do their thing and be nice to people and live their own lives. There are people out there, though, that need to help those people and their naivete and protect them from those sorts of charlatans and sharks and snake oil salesmen. And as I started to dive deeper into the esports space, again, gambling, and I think, I don't know if you guys saw, but I was intimately involved with the Washington State Gambling Commission when they were going after Valve for a variety of reasons, whether it was loot boxes, as we call them, or various, gambling ideas, and then and Valve really, just to kind of switch gears a little bit, Valve really was the one that kicked this whole thing off. When they hired the former minister of Greece's finance to create an ecosystem where, they got a cut of every single deal and they got loot, like that guy's he is the one that started this whole thing. And Valve, look what happened. Valve was an okay running company. And then when they started doing the loot boxes on the backs of the Greek minister they hired, look at how much money they've made over there. Right. The other thing is any new sporting or competitive entity, unfortunately, in my opinion now, they prey on the vices of those that can't control themselves. Whether it's drinking, gambling, all those things. What's the last thing to go out of any town that fails? The bar. That'll be the last thing that packs up and leaves, right? Because people have to have their alcohol. And in esports, when I started seeing, again, all the gambling sites, the roulette wheels, let's talk about the owners not paying their players, lying to them about their investments and how much money they've got, saying, no, let's put this org together, talking specifically about denial. and Robbie Rinalda, I believe his name was, and how he started an org and just didn't pay his players for months. And in fact, I think one of the girls that was playing for Selfless at the time had to pay the bills for the house because he couldn't or wouldn't pay the players. So just with those two separate things, with the gambling and the vices, with esports owners not paying their players properly or at a living rate, there was more than enough to dive into to try and help, because I think esports is a worthwhile endeavor, because there is no more inclusive thing on the planet than video games, because it doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter if you're the 6'8" extreme athlete or a 110-pound kid in a wheelchair. Once you hit the sticks, it's all even. And that's what I love about this space.
Yeah, no, I think us too. And that's one of the things that Nefi and I have identified with, both having runs with traditional sports to a point. And then we were both told at different points in our careers, you're just not quite the right size or what we're looking for. And that sucks whenever it's your passion and you want to keep on going. And so it's great. One of the things that attracted us to esports was the fact that it's so inclusive of really anyone. And now we're seeing more gender inclusivity, which is great.
Exactly.
But
I'm a coach of women for 28 years. I've coached women and girls for 20. I have a daughter that's 16, right? And so, and throughout my coaching career, and sorry to interrupt, Jake.
No, you're good.
I think this is so important. Throughout my coaching career, I've told my players, you need to be women that can stand up on their own 2 feet, and you don't need anybody. Because unfortunately, my mom, she had to have a man to survive, because she didn't have a skill set that could make money and, have a family. So me and my brother got dragged around from boyfriend to boyfriend because she didn't have enough money to survive. And I don't want any player I've ever coached or any woman I come in contact with or anybody regardless to need somebody. I want them to be able to stand on their own feet. And again, a coach of 28 years with women and girls, I think this is a great opportunity for them to rule the world and be able to create a career path where they can have what they want, not what they need.
Yeah. Well, no, and we completely agree. And that's one of the things that we think about, that we think is so great about esports. But my question for you is, you touched on the fact that esports early on, at least in 2013, 2014, 15, even as we get here, we are today, that it attracted some portions of business, some vices, it appealed to certain vices that aren't ideal, and it left some room for exploitation. Did you see that same type of risk involved in, let's say, minor league baseball or NBA D League and in traditional sports generally? And if you did see those, or if you didn't, how do you think that's related to esports at all?
Well, don't be mad at me, but I think we can see that cheating still happens in baseball today.
I mean, today, I don't know. Today, I don't know.
Are we out?
For the podcast listeners, for the guys that are not watching the video,
don't be mad.
I'm wearing an orange polo because the Astros are currently playing in the World Series. And
well deserved. Well deserved. I promise. That's my well deserved. So to answer Jake, the answer is absolutely yes. Every sports league seems to have started off with, altruistic intentions, right? But then they come out of the woodwork. I mean, all we have to talk about is the Black Sox, right? Shoeless Joe Jackson and the rest of the team taking money to throw, was it the '08 World Series, I think it was, or 8, I forget. I think there's an 8 in there. But they threw a World Series, right? Because they weren't making enough money. Isn't that really what happens? It's like the smaller organizations that can't afford to pay, a living salary, they're the ones that, where the guy in the trench coat, hey, buddy, come here. I've got something I want to talk to you about. What do you mean I can make $10,000 if I throw one map? Yeah. Instead of hitting that headshot right there, just yank the mouse a little bit and miss. We'll pay you $10,000. I think, Jake, you hit on the head. I think it is very synonymous to the early days of just about any sport, in that when you are just starting, that's when all the lack of oversight, right? Because they haven't have established best practices or have investigative bodies, that they're not there yet. So
Right.
it's prime for the taking in the beginning, but you notice, and I would say the biggest kind of gambling thing that we had, Pete Rose, I would say, is probably the last one in Major League Baseball, because there wasn't, the internet, there wasn't as much information. But now with
Right.
the new technological age and the way that people can study things forensically, I mean, holy cow, they can tell you to the nanosecond when these bets are coming in. And that's why they can tell you, they have an AI that goes, nope, this match was most likely fixed, 95% that this match was fixed, 86% this match was fixed. So I absolutely believe we are still in those middling days of where things can still go wrong as far as gambling and other things in the space.
Well, and Nefi and I have an episode on regulatory or regulations in esports and certain regulatory bodies, because they are in their infancy, really.
Yes,
but
there's so much to talk about there. Yeah.
Well, so we discussed ESIC, and in the world of esports regulatory bodies, as a journalist that regularly investigates the gaps in esports regulations, where do you see ESIC as it stands today? Do you think it's on the right track, or do you think it needs to be rethought? And what's your feelings on that?
Well, authority is really only derived from those people that give it to you. I mean, that's a fact, right? The only people that have authority over esports are the publishers. They own the IP, they own the game. They are truly the last say in anything. They can overrule ESIC at any time. They literally could go there and say, no, this cat gets to play because we like this dude, if they so chose.
Right.
And so things like ESIC, right? Well, I think what you're seeing is another gold rush to see who's going to be the governing body for the various esports entities. I like to talk about it like this. Do you remember back, and it still happens today, but when I was watching boxing, on TV, and it was on TV or HBO back in the day. We had a box, you had to flip a switch to watch. You would hear, and now the WBA, WBC, WBO, WBW champion. It's like, bro, and that's what you're seeing today, right? You're seeing so many different organizations, especially collegiately here in North America. You're seeing so many people vie to be the governing agency, because let's just be real honest. If you're the governing agency, it's going to be a business that makes money. That's really what they're into it for. I mean, it is. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's some people that are doing it wrong. I don't even know what ESIC's doing, because I haven't seen them publish anything other than 18 months apart, I want to say, at some point with that investigation. I'm going to do air quotes if you can't see him. Well, ESIC doing that investigation that basically came out so far apart, and nobody even, and people got mad at me for it, and maybe I'm on the other side of the opinion on this, but ESIC appears to want to be a conference provider more than it wants to be a governorship. I mean, they're promoting their own conferences, and I'm not seeing, investigations. I'm not seeing, and yes, so we've seen, 2 in Counter-Strike with the viewership bug and coaches being able to see different players placing a camera. But ESIC is not as involved as a governing body should be, because we still got a lot of problems going on in this space. So again, ESIC, their authority is only derived from the people that give it to them. And then sometimes the people that even sign the deal with them are still doing their own things. Again, ESIC's telling you that a guy can't play CSGO, as you guys well know and have probably already talked about, can't tell them they can't play Valorant.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah, so I until the publishers figure out something that works, I am not very bullish on, the governing bodies of esports.
Yeah, and that's interesting because so we did a whole episode on ESIC, and that's essentially our conclusion was the only way it works is people have to give it the authority and the respect that they're promising that they're going to give.
They need to sign a deal with Riot, not ESL. They need to sign a deal with Activision Blizzard, not Face It Pro League, right? It's like if they're literally they need the backing of the publisher. Everything else doesn't matter. They need to, they need to be the de facto leadership of esports for the publisher. And until that happens, I just don't think they are going to be very effective.
Yeah. And that's interesting. And that's a tough hurdle to overcome, is to be, I guess, important enough to where a publisher feels like they should sign a contract, because
or give up any power. Yeah,
exactly. And that's what I was going to say. With giving power, you're also creating some type of liability. And they just kind of want to be hands off and say, look, we'll let you guys do this thing, pay us our fees or whatever, and you guys do you, essentially. And they're relatively hands off, which I guess is a good and bad. It's good because it allows everybody to govern themselves, and it's bad because if they're not sanctioned by the publishers themselves, they really don't have any bite. Again, the bite, it's a team could say no, and what is ESIC going to do, really? And so, but then again, and I agree with you. I think the timing is also questionable, especially this last major tournament where they, made a couple of findings of their investigations that were kind of quietly happening in the background. The timing, I don't think, was great because nobody knew what was going on, and people were just pissed off, and they're like, "What?" They didn't even know what ESIC was, and then they're coming in and they're dropping this hammer where like you can't coach and you can't play, and
wasn't it right before the major? Right before
it was literally
it was
right
before.
Yeah,
and so and people were like, "What the hell?" Like you can't just do that to them.
We expected, because you go, and this is happening now, but it's like, if you don't have the information and you've signed players, I mean, do you guys remember when Activision Blizzard and OWL decided that they were going to have hero bans? And so when I want to say it was the Gladiators that signed Flower, who was like the best Widowmaker on the planet for a long time, they signed him to play. Widowmaker was banned for like 3 of the competitions. So they literally wasted millions, because I think I want to say they signed him for like 1.5 or something, a ridiculous amount. But they signed this kid to play Widowmaker for them. And they did not tell anybody this was going to happen. So then you signed this Widowmaker only to find out, 2 weeks before competition starts, oh, we're going to do this. And now the money you put into Flower to play Widowmaker, you lose that value because now he can't play the position he's best at. I mean, and that kind of stuff happens, and you just go, why? What are you doing?
Well,
why? I'm expected to play with this roster at the major, and now you're telling me maybe my coach and this player can't play? Get out of here.
Well, I think part of it is what goes back to the fact that everyone that's a part of ESIC has to voluntarily subject themselves to it. And I think to an extent that put ESIC in between a rock and a hard place, where they didn't want to suspend anybody without exhausting the appeals process. But then because they didn't have as robust of an investigatory power as they would like, that ended up taking a long time. And so at the end, by the time you exhaust the appeals process and everything else, you end up having a final decision where the punishment comes down. And then you just have so much time in between, which is different than... Yeah, which is different than like if you are in the NFL and there's allegations and someone gets suspended, but then the investigation is 9 days or 10 days and the appeal is 4 days and everything's within the NFLPA rules and the NFL charter, which is a much more robust body of enforcement than ESIC. And so you have a lot more effective sort of punishment challenge ruling cycles. And so I think, with ESIC, because they want to exhaust the whole appeals process before enforcing any suspension or ban. It just, and because their investigations took a long time, it just makes it so difficult to have a timely ruling.
Well, didn't you see? I want to say it was literally two guys looking through all the video. I want to say it was two guys looking through all those hours of video. The scope and size of that investigation dwarfed their assets.
Yeah,
they just
100%.
were not ready for that type of investigation. It's very much like a small PD having a big crime happen and asking for help from the county, right? Because maybe their detective bureau is like 2 people while the county's got, 150 detectives sitting over there. So it's like, it's very similar to that. But in this case, ESIC may have reached out to a couple of people, but they didn't reach out to enough.
Yeah. And I don't know for a fact whether it was 2 people. I remember hearing or reading that it was a small team for sure.
I just remember they said that one guy, they lauded the one guy that went through all the videos. I saw that tweet. I forget his name, but he did he did a great job because he did a lot of work. But I just remember that one tweet that said, thanks to this one dude that went through all this stuff. So let's just assume it was a very small team.
It was a small team, yeah. And
to be fair.
And I don't want to discredit ESIC. Obviously, I think highly of ESIC for sure. But if you're going to be the governing body, you've got to, one, get some type of, be sanctioned by the publishers. I think that's an important key thing. And I think that's going to be the hardest. Obviously, I guarantee you, had they wanted, if it was up to them, they probably would at this point. But there's one reason or another, and most of them are business related as to why they're just kind of lifting their hands and saying,
"Oh yeah,
y'all do it." But and to kind of discuss something you brought up, which is the Activision Microsoft merger. We sort of talked a little bit about it. Jake and I have had a whole episode about it where we discussed the actual merger and the horizontal versus vertical merger. One of the things that we're gonna expect to see as that deal sort of unfolds and develops is Microsoft typically doesn't like to keep a lot of things in-house, especially the esport entities. And so where do you see that going? Do you anticipate that, I'll leave it open-ended. What do you think is going to happen with a lot of those in-house esports?
Well, a part of me feels almost like this acquisition is going to be very similar to Elon's takeover of Twitter. It sounded like a good idea at the time. Right. And then he finds out that, wait, 44 billion or whatever it was, that's actually a lot of money. And, he's got to go sell some stocks and he's not, now he's because now all the information's coming. He's not sure if it's going to be worth it. Right. At the time, I believe that Microsoft, was talking to Activision Blizzard. We were still in that bullish phase of esports, right? Where there was still money coming in. It was this, but now that we're seeing a slight downturn, I'm not sure Microsoft is as happy as they were when they first started doing this negotiations. But moving on from that, Microsoft is notorious for farming out third parties to run their esports, right? I mean, Halo, just to be as the example. And from what my sources are telling me, same thing's going to happen with Overwatch and CDL. That's what I'm hearing. Now, things could change, right? But I'm telling you, my sources are saying that there's going to be third-party production, third-party, people running the league, and that Microsoft is going to unload as much of that as possible, creating levels of separation between themselves, and the esports division. While they do think it's important, it just seems that Microsoft, from what I'm hearing, believes that it's just much easier and less messy to put that third party. So after the acquisition goes through, which I believe, I want to say is going to be like second quarter 23, I believe you're going to see a lot of the esports entities, and we're talking, Warcraft Arena, OWL, CDL, various other things going out, I think you're going to see a lot of people making bids, like Esports Engine, Savvy Faceit Group, ESL Faceit Group, sorry. Those guys making bids, because if I'm not mistaken, I think didn't ESL already grab Hearthstone? I think they've already got StarCraft 2. And while those are kind of minor league sports, minor league esports, I think that's literally the precursor to what you're going to see going forward.
Well, I think what worries us just a little bit is with Microsoft and their subsidiary 343,
Yes.
how they've handled their relationship with the Halo Championship Series and HCS, where Nefi and I love Halo and we love HCS. Their World Championship just went through last weekend. Optic Gaming won, followed by Cloud9, and then Native Gaming, a brand new player on the scene, which HCS still allows for, which we love and we think that's awesome. But really, Tashi and the guys at HCS they had a hard time creating an esports competitive atmosphere within the bounds of 343 and didn't have a whole lot of help from them, at least it seems from us. And it seems like they told HCS, hey, you have to paint this house and you're only getting a hammer to do it. And so you can only do a little work and it's hard not to damage what's already there.
I think you're going to see a little bit. I think you're going to see okay budget line items going into esports from Microsoft, though. And I think that will be the difference, right? It's like, okay, you guys are going to run it and we'll give you enough money to run it, right? But you're right. Small publishers, smaller. I mean, who thought we would say that today, right? When Halo first came out, that thing, I mean, just anybody was playing Halo on their Xbox, right? I mean, that's just the way it went. But who would say, today as a smaller game, they really did struggle with the Halo World Championships, whether it was, giving that big game feel to competitive integrity decisions to, all sorts of different things. I want to see Halo thrive. I actually think it's a great game. It's very entertaining. It's right. It's a lot of fun. So, I mean, honestly, I think Microsoft is going to give enough money to make it worthwhile. But that works to their advantage too, because they're like, literally they can say, well, we gave these people enough money. All the blame is going to be on third party if anything ever goes wrong. I mean, that's kind of the perfect world, right? It's like, I've got the money, you've got the know-how. If you screw it up, I'm insulated from it. So here you go. And I think that's really the smart play, to be honest. I think everybody should do it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a pretty standard procedure that a lot of publishers do. I mean, we were just talking about ESIC, for example. Part of the reason is they don't want to be beholden or they don't want to be tied in with a questionable decision or, any sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, controversy.
I was gonna say controversy. Yeah.
Controversy. They don't want to be attached to it. And I mean, and I get it. I understand it. And really the key is as long as they're financing it and continuing to push it and allowing it to grow, that's a good thing. And so, they're kind of the puppet masters from the back, it's sort of behind the curtain. As long as it continues to grow, I guess is not a bad thing. And, to kind of echo what you guys are saying about Halo, Halo is one of the, one of my favorite and one of the first esports that I personally competed in. And, I mean, and I think that the feeling that we all share right now is what's keeping Halo alive at the moment is the sheer loyalty I think that people have to Halo, and it's kind of sad to see the viewership drop. I mean, I think total it was dismal. I mean, it was probably like 70, 80,000 concurrent viewers or something like that, which
so World Championship, because they enabled co-streams, they actually pulled some great numbers. I think they were at 150K or something like that, which dwarfs the CDL, oddly enough. But they had to get creative with it.
I was going to say with creators with 10, 20,000 viewers each, like their typical audience and their co-streaming and it bumped up the numbers for sure. But, there were some things that were happening before, like the crowdfunding whole, debacle where they were supposed to include that as it was a huge mess and we hate to see it, but overall it seemed to be like a good event generally. Now,
Yeah, for sure.
Changing gears, and something that you said, which is very important, is one of the big things that we wanted to discuss with you was what you mentioned, the downturn in esports. One thing and that we've seen you talk about, and Jake and I regularly discuss with clients, with sponsors, with companies and brands, is sort of this slow but noticeable withdrawal of money from the scene. Can you kind of walk us through what you think is happening and whether or not we should be worried?
Yeah. So look, 2013 to 2015, people decide, wait, this is going to be a thing where people can make money. And who really, really kicked it off, in my opinion, was Activision Blizzard getting the Crafts, the Wilpons, to buy into the Overwatch League, right? They got some big sports names to throw some money into the pot. And if you don't know out there, that's why it's so hard to get money, because you have to wait for the first person with money to throw in. And then if all of them see that happen, and that's why Activision Blizzard was smart. And I mean, Kodak's no dummy. He knows you have to get that first, dollar amount thrown in, and then people will follow. It's kind of the cool kids club, right? You want to be part of the next cool thing that's happening. So, esports, it was growing. But what you saw was some really strange things where players run the show. Players dictated salaries, not according to value, according to what they want. Because if you're real honest and you look at some teams that were paying $150,000 a month for their Counter-Strike team, they were getting no returns on that. Everybody was in the red, right? I mean, esports, I like to say, is the only place where the players fire the coach, not the other way around, right? And I can tell you the amount of salary that people are taking has been growing. So these people are pouring in money, trusting these 23 to 24-year-olds in some cases with the keys to the castle, saying, all right, kid, go make us some money, to find out the only thing that kid was good at was playing video games. Right? There's a couple out there that are a little different, and I would say, Matthew and Hector, Nate Shot and Hex are not in that category. They're, they were young and new and had good head on their shoulders in order to, take some investments and turning it into, real money. But if you look at a lot of other places, it wasn't like that. And now you're watching money dry up. I mean, I can tell you right now, so FaZe Clan, I think, closed at $3.58 today. Okay. Today being, October 28th, right? Their CEO is making $600,000 a year. Okay. That's public information in their filing. $600,000 a year. Right. And hey, if it's worth it, it's worth it. I'm just noting that, to me, that seems like an exorbitant salary for the beginnings of this whole esports things. And there are other CEOs. I mean, if you look at the amount of money being put into salary, that's why people are folding so much, because all their money is going to salaries and not, what do you call that? Research and development, R&D, right? Creating products, doing things like that. We spend all our money on salaries. And what you're finally seeing, in my opinion, is a correction to that. That's why people are leaving. Positions are being eliminated. Some organizations altogether are folding up shop, right? I think you're seeing these smart people that were relying on those that may not have known what they told you they knew. And now they've learned, and they're now putting their money to better use. So, Nefi, no worries. I think this is a great thing, and it sucks for all my friends. I mean, I could lose my job. Who knows, right? Because of, we are in a contracting period. but it's the best thing for us. It really is. I think we're going to get through this contracting period because I think those people that are pulling the purse strings are now getting a better understanding, and they're going to scale appropriately. And as you and I kind of talked pre-show, Mark Cuban already knew that. And he's not even in gaming. Yeah. You know, I mean, slightly with Mavs gaming, doing some NBA stuff, but that dude figured it out from the start. We've spoken on 3 or 4 different occasions, and that's what he said. Video games are fickle. We don't know how long one's going to last, you know, because if I invest $1 million into my Team X, well, video game Z is the next big thing. My investment in Team X doesn't mean anything. So those fickle, you know, kind of wants and ebbs and flows into what's popular and what's not has him and a lot of other people concerned, right? And that's what Activision Blizzard tried to do to sort of assuage those concerns. But obviously that's not working. But I think now, and the words that you saw in Cuban's tweet to me were, you know, scaling appropriately. I think we're finally getting to that spot where we are going to scale appropriately. And it sucks because I've got some good friends that are out of jobs. But in my heart, I believe, and in my brain, I believe they'll be back because I believe the opportunities will be even bigger and better in the future.
Yeah.
Do you see, as we look back on traditional sports, obviously, you know, baseball and football and basketball at the professional level in North America have had a much longer head start than esports. Esports is mostly something that's come around during our lifetime. And those traditional sports have been able to go through periods of growth and contraction, really through turbulent times where you have Major League Baseball having to make it through World War I and the Spanish flu. And then you have the 20s of Major League Baseball, which really saw a lot of growth. And you had Babe Ruth and Murderers Row. Same thing with kind of World War II and professional American football, where after, World War II, we come back and then people are looking for a new form of entertainment. And then you have, Lombardi and the Packers in the 50s and the big, the big NFL explosion that you have that even took over the AFL eventually. Now that we've had esports begin off to kind of somewhat of a hot start, and then we were hit by this pandemic, which impacted every single one of our lives, but more importantly, impacted a trajectory in esports that, who knows where it would have gone. Do you see esports at some point growing and being bigger than it was in that, 15, 16, 17 era? Or do you see it being stronger, but maybe on a smaller scale than it was pre-pandemic?
Well, let's kind of start from the beginning in that Pong came out in 1971, I want to say, or 70, in the 70s. We'll just put it that way.
70s,
Yeah.
That's the first video game. Baseball was invented in 1800s. So how many years head start has traditional sports had over esports, right? So there's that, the history is there, right? But here's the thing, you guys. We are headed to such a technologically advanced society that I really think video games and VR and AR and everything in between is still, we're such in our infancy. I think it's going to blow up. I mean, okay, I'm a nerd, and the original Battlestar Galactica, they were still playing this form of basketball, right? Because you still need to be physically fit, and that's really what sports are for as a kid, right? Let's be real honest. We need to be physically fit. That's what PE, that's what sports are for. They're more for teaching you valuable lessons on how to get along in the real world. You take sports off the planet, we're still going to move, right? We're still going to do things. We'll just be a lot fatter than we are. But I believe that esports hasn't even touched its growth potential yet. And here's a couple of reasons why. There's a barrier to entry still in a majority of African nations. Okay, that once the world sort of catches up and everybody has some sort of technological advancement and it's not third world. I mean, I want to say that more than half the world is still behind. I mean, India is number one in mobile gaming, because of the barrier to entry to PCs and consoles, right? So we still have billions of people that don't have PCs and consoles. We have the West, China, Korea that have technology. The barriers to entry are a little bit less, right? The rest of the freaking world hasn't even gotten there yet. So imagine the one day where every African kid has a PC, where, every kid in Asia, I mean, some people forget that Russia is a part of Asia, and India. Those, when they catch up and they have PCs, they're going to want to play. So I think while, yes, we are in a technological, boom here in the West and in China, we still have a lot of people that need to catch up, and they will. And when they do, okay, ready? Here's my, what's that skit that Conan O'Brien used to do in the year 3000? In the year 3000, sports will be played VR, and you will compete against people. The World Baseball League will be competed against a team in China playing against the team in US in some cases. In the year 3000.
In the year 3000, book it.
Yeah.
Book it.
I'm a huge fan of traditional sports, and I hope that's not the case, because I think the physicality makes a huge difference. But I absolutely think that VR is the future, and you know, I consume a lot of technology. Like podcasts, and I follow a lot of people that are involved. I remember I was watching this the podcast with Mr. Beast right now. I don't know if he's got some downtime, but he's been doing a lot of podcasts lately. The guy's the king of YouTube. And although he's young, he's got one thing correct, in my opinion, which is that this video games, YouTube, Twitch is the future of entertainment. You look at it from a practical standpoint as a father of a relatively young daughter. You said she was 16 years old.
Yep.
And I say this all the time. You ask a kid, whenever I was growing up or whenever you were growing up, what do you want to do when you grow up? And they'll tell you your typical, I want to be a police officer. I want to be a firefighter. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer, accountant, whatever. You ask a kid today, what do you want to do when you grow up? You can ask a child that's 3, 4, 5 years old, barely learning to talk, what do you want to do? And they will tell you, I want to be a YouTuber.
It wasn't the fact that I was in law enforcement that my daughter thought I was cool, or that I coached with the Olympic team that thought I was cool. You want to know what made me cool? I talked to Ninja. That made me cool. that I literally wrote. I had the exclusive on Sapnap signing with NRG.
Yeah.
My daughter went.
That article.
Yeah, my daughter went. You talked to I was like, that's what makes me cool. Yeah, you hit it. You're absolutely right. It's. That's where it's at.
That's and kids today, and it's all going to be a transition, right? We're seeing slowly the transition of wealth.
Yeah.
It's going to be the transition of consumerism in general. And whenever I saw that tweet between you and Mark Cuban that were going back and forth, I personally have. I think what's sort of what we call, I guess, a downturn in esports is that because esports is so fresh and so new, and there's always a gold rush, everybody was speculating as to the value, right? For those of you who don't know what speculation means, it means you're guessing, they're assuming, because there really is no there's not enough information to quantify the value of a certain thing, because the value is so wide, right? It has a different value to teams, it has a different value to players, it has a different value to consumers, and it has a different value to sponsors, brands, and people that are involved. Every single person has a different benefit to esports, and there was really no way to say what it's worth. And you were talking about it earlier, for example, with players wanting to choose whatever they want to get paid, right? Yep. How do you justify it? I think part of the reason with FaZe and I still think FaZe is being profitable. I just think they overestimated. They speculated and to their detriment a little bit. They overvalued what their
only by about $780 million, because their market cap's at like 235 right now, and they valued at $1 billion. I mean, that's really why they went public. I mean, just as an aside, they wanted to hit that $1 billion valuation, but now their market cap is somewhere where I think they actually are at 235.
Right. And
Sure.
Is the value going to go up? I absolutely think so. Right. Without
Sure.
getting, I personally I'm an investor to a degree, right? I bought stocks in FaZe is what I'm saying, because I honestly and truly believe that they're going to go up. I mean, those
They
guys
should.
are movers and
Yeah.
shakers, and I have faith in them. And people are like, oh, esports is dying or FaZe is dying because of valuation. Not at all.
Nah.
If you really understand the way the valuation
Not
works.
financial advice.
Yes.
Yeah, not financial advice at all. The reason why
Not a
I'm
forward-looking
saying is-
statement.
and I thank you, Jake. As attorneys, we got to throw in these caveats in there. Every esports is very different. FaZe is very bullish with the way that they handle entertainment. FaZe, in my opinion, is one of the precursors and the changers. They've really are the pioneers, along with arguably Optic and
Agreed. Yeah.
and Hex. They are the pioneers of esports and video games in this entire industry. These are the first two major organizations that went mainstream. I mean, Optic is known around the world. And then you slowly have like the Nate Shots and a lot of these smaller orgs that are starting to blow up. Our good friend Justin Kenna, who was originally with FaZe, who is now the CEO of GameSquare, who's in charge of Complexity.
Yep.
He was discussing how I think they netted like 50 million over their expected income or what was it, profit. Because every org is a little different, right? You don't see Complexity in the front and center as you do FaZe constantly, and so everybody takes a different approach. And so, in other words, I echo your sentiment, which is, there's, we're seeing some shift in the paradigm, and there's what I consider adjustment, right?
A correction. Absolutely.
Exactly. A correction. Yep. And so, let me, sorry, go ahead, Jake.
I was going to say, well, the hard part is esports is so new that we have no real cohorts or models, right? If someone asks you, how do you think that esports is going to recover from the pandemic with the economic model, you can't go back and see how esports recovered from 2008 because esports didn't really exist in 2008. Yeah. If someone says, how do you think a publicly traded company like FaZe in esports is going to recover from either a downturn or a correction, you don't really know because there aren't really other publicly traded companies that rose through esports. They just don't really exist. So you have no real cohorts for modeling.
This is the frontier for sure. This is the land grab. This is, go west.
Yeah. Well, and I think before we get too long, I know our time's getting short and we promised you we wouldn't take up too much of it, but I would regret if I didn't ask you a little bit. Sorry, Nefi, if I'm gonna. Okay.
I already know exactly where you're going.
Okay.
I'm glad you
so
are.
If I didn't talk a little bit about this, so we live in Texas, and one organization very near and dear to our hearts is Optic Gaming, which has its franchise in the CDL Optic Texas. We've heard your name a lot from Hector Rodriguez, and every time he mentions an esports journalist, he goes, like the Kevin Hitts out there, or like Kevin Hitt, and so you broke the story of Hector Rodriguez Hex reacquiring Optic Gaming from Immortals Gaming Club.
Broke a phone over me breaking that story. If you saw the video.
Yes, exactly. Will you just give us a short story about how that happened and what your relationship is with Optic and Hector as it stands today?
Yeah, no. So I think there's an adversarial relationship between journalists and influential esports figures in the space, right? I can tell you this. Remember when I said I will be honest always, or I won't answer a question if I don't want to, here's the thing. I don't think Hector cares for me much right now, and that's okay. I think, look at this, on the record, I think Hector's a good dude. I think Hector's a good businessman, and I think he's built something fabulous. End of story. I really do. Everything else is just a byproduct of the adversarial relationship between journalist and esports figure. That's what I chalk it up to. So if we ever bark at each other, it's just because we've been put in an adversarial position, right? But I'll tell you what, do I respect the hell out of that dude? Check. Do I think he's one of the better businessmen on the planet when it comes to esports? Check. And does he put a quality product out there? Check. So with those are my thoughts on Hector. I mean, I'm absolutely pro Hector businessman, pro Hector human, has a great family. Look, sometimes we don't get along, and that's because of the adversarial relationship. Nothing more to add to that, right?
Right.
As far as the optic, man, I'll tell you, I don't know. I think what people figured out, you guys, and it took a while, but people didn't know who I was when I first got here. I wasn't Duncan. I wasn't Richard. I wasn't Monty. There's so many people before me, right? But what I think, I really believe this, if you just ask any owner that knows me or anybody that knows who I am, they'll, instead of me having to tell you, they would tell you and back me up. I pride myself on being as honest as absolute possible. And I would rather you tell me, sorry, Kev, I can't talk about it, rather than make something up. And I'll tell you what, I'll never do you wrong. If you tell me something's off the record, it's off the record. And I can tell you, and not only that, but sort of being an elder statesman in the space because of my age mostly, I can read the room. I'm not going to write articles unless they're absolutely necessary that going to affect the competitive integrity or performance of a team during a tournament. Like writing about people that are getting traded in the middle of a game or middle of an event, right? I mean,
Right.
doesn't that suck if you were literally playing for a team and you read an article in the middle of your event, whether it be, Halo CSGO, that you were going to get traded? That would suck, right? And would it make you maybe, you've got to read the room, right? So I think I do those things very well. And so when it came to the Immortals, and I honestly don't remember who spilled the beans on that. I just remember getting a phone call from a source saying, he's going to do it again, Kev. Like, what are you talking about? He's going to get it back. He's going to get it back. And I was very happy and very pleased. And if you guys don't know, one of my all-time favorite people works at Optic, Paige Reed. I coached her in college. Did you guys know that?
Oh, what?
She
No,
was
we
one of
did
my
not
know that, but that's awesome.
No, I coached her in college. She was one of our defensive specialists at Cal State Fullerton when I was assistant coach there. So we and overarching, don't we need the Optics of the world to thrive so that everybody else can get there? So let's hope that Optic gets even bigger and Mobata.
Okay.
We agree.
Yeah.
On an ending note, right? As for the listeners and the viewers that are watching this and the people that are listening to this, if you have somebody that's looking to get into journalism and esports in particular, what are some advice that you can give them to get into this career? What are some things that maybe some stepping stones or some tips to say, hey, you know what, this is what I did and this is what I recommend you do?
So I'm going to just relate the story of George Geddes. I hired George. I was the very first person that hired George Geddes to write. He was, I want to say he was like a 17-year-old kid out of nowhere. He just emailed me one day and said, I really love this and I can write about this. And I asked him to send me, a couple of things. He didn't lie. He knew the space. He knew the game he was writing about. And so we did like a 6-article deal where, we paid him over 6 pieces. He did a great job. Now, if that wouldn't have worked out, that doesn't mean that obviously George is doing great now. So that guy's talented. He knows what he's doing. He's off on a great career, right? But it's like, you got to know your content. I would say just being a player isn't enough. Like, no, I'm really good at League. It's not that simple. You really do need to immerse yourself in the space, know what you're talking about, and then be able to articulate that in writing, right? And so I would just make sure that I was a master of my space, that I was a master, of what I was doing, and then continue to hone my skills. And don't be afraid to be persistent. I'm telling you, one of the things that Jacob Wolf is better than anybody else on the planet is his bulldog-like mentality and chasing a story. He just doesn't let go. And that's what he's really, really good at. And he's persistent and he's good at it. And so I would say be persistent, know your material, don't say no. And again, ultimately, in the 1,000 timelines that can happen, there is a timeline where people just aren't going to be able to do it, right? I was never going to be the center for my beloved Los Angeles Lakers. Just wasn't going to happen. Wasn't in the cards, no matter how many tryouts I would go to, right? But I can write, and I can write about the center of the Los Angeles Lakers, and I can write about esports. So I would say those are my tips. And even though you're seeing, again, a sort of contraction of esports media sites, I know a whole lot of people that started by starting their own, and look at them now. So I still think there's going to be a great deal to come. Plus, there's so many news organizations out there, such as Fox News, NBC, ABC. You know, I know they're sort of a ESPN, you know, Disney-owned company, but there's local ABC. I feel people are going to want to know about gaming. There's going to be a lot of opportunities, so be ready.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And so in closing, what do you have going on? Is there something you want to talk about that's going on in your personal life or your professional life story you want people to keep an eye on? I read the Sapnap you know, ownership of NRG deal, and anything you want to promote.
So a couple things. My goal is always as a writer is to break our website, which I can say, self brag, whatever you want to call it. But I can say that I've broken TEO's website on 4 occasions, and that is my goal. And the Sapnap story that got a lot of play. And the stories I think we should be paying particular attention to right now are the media rights deals. Where are they? CDL, Al, starting in how long? Nothing yet, right? Their deal's up at the end of 2022, and I believe CDL starts like December something or other, like the first week, right?
Yeah,
right.
No media rights deal. So that's going to be a bigger theme, because remember the $80 million deal, 120, all those YouTube, all those Twitch deals. You're not going to see those. Okay, you're not going to see those anymore. You might get a little bit. So pay attention to those. But to professionally, what we're starting at SBJ is I'm going to be doing a lot more video, and I'm going to be doing a lot more like 15-minute news shows where we do either a daily or a weekly, where we're going to give it to you. PvP Live, man, they were on to the right thing. They were just too early. They just came in too early. There just wasn't enough want, for lack of a better word. But man, they were doing it right. If PvP Live was around today, I think they'd be doing very well. So look for a lot more video content coming from me and SBJ going forward.
Awesome, man. Well,
Awesome.
thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for tuning. Thank you, Kevin, for taking the time.
Yeah.
Talking to a couple of young esports lawyers about everything
love it,
happening
man.
in esports. And, we love sitting with you guys, learning about you. Because you're, again, we told Richard the same thing. You guys are always talking about other people. And I think it's sort of a breath of fresh air for the listeners and your viewers and your fans, or your followers, to get to know you a little bit more in this context. And I think we need more of it, and we're happy to have you. And so thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, Kevin, for your time. Make sure you guys follow us on social media. You can find us at the Law of Esports on all handles. And I want to make sure I give you're the right one. It's at Kevin_Hitt, HITT, right?
That's it. Yes, sir.
On Twitter.
Yep.
If you guys are watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. We don't say that often because it's not in our vocabulary to say that, but like the Richard Lewis video got, I don't know, like 10 or 11,000 views, and
It's worth it.
Yeah, it's you guys tune in. We're going to try to talk to a lot more different people. So thank you guys so much. Kevin, again, thank you for stopping by.
A pleasure.
Thank you, man.
guys.
I really appreciate it.
We'll see y'all on the next video.
See you guys.
Thank you.